great to be here. It's great to be here on this warm, Florida evening with all of you. We've had somewhat of a chilly winter, even in California. It's amazing to be a part of Refresh Miami. Maria has been incredibly convincing and persistent over the last couple of years, and I think. But it's a pleasure. It's always a pleasure to talk to a group of people who are very hungry to learn, who want to understand, how it's done maybe in a different set of companies. And so I'm really happy. Even though it's a short flight in and out, I'm really happy to be here. And so quick intro. My name is Chandra. I run product and growth for Headspace. Headspace is a growth stage company in Santa Monica, and started off as guided meditation for everybody, and our eventual goal is to be a health and happiness service that helps you from everything from birth to death and everything in between. And we think of it still as day one in that journey. Prior to that, did social gaming for Zynga. Had a roller coaster ride there, was a product leader at Zynga, and before that spent some time at Amazon. And farther back out, I used to be a mechanical engineer designing domestic products, for your home, and I was working for a company called Philips Electronics. So pretty much, the sort of the consistent thread is really consumer products. And so when I think about the decade-long experience in product, the one thing, if I had to name one thing, the one thing that I've gained, it's actually a deep empathy for people who do product, and it is a very, very tough role, and it is tough at many, many levels. So when I was invited to speak to all of you, I thought about, hey, how could I make life a little bit easier, a little bit more fun for people who do product? And so I decided to focus on one particular use case, one part of the journey as a product person, which is when you become a product leader, and so we're going to focus on sort of product leadership and how do you sort of set yourself up for success. Before we dive in, I'd love to know just to get a feel for the audience, I'd love to know how many of you are or have been sort of product people? That's pretty awesome. It's about 60%. How many of you are entrepreneurs? About 40%. That's pretty cool. How many of you want to be product leaders? About 30%. That's awesome. So hopefully, I've structured this so there's something in it for all of you. And so let's jump in. So here's the scenario. So imagine this for a minute. So you've become the head of product at a growth stage company. First off, massive congratulations, because that is a super impactful, highly coveted role that you've just landed. It's not easy. It comes with a ton of responsibility. It comes with a ton of influence. And momentarily, you feel like a superhero. And rightfully so, because it's an amazing role. It's just that feeling that you have when you know that there's a lot riding on what you're going to do on the role. However, without the right moves, you can quickly find yourself the focal point for a ton of challenging issues that can come, at you from different directions. Whether it's results, whether it's how do you innovate, how do you, what's the vision, how do you focus on the user, all sorts of things. And they can often come at you all in one shot. And it can become very hard to navigate it, and it can create this sort of downward spiral, and you can become like the superhero who is actually not that invincible. So the the question is, how do you preemptively get ahead of that? How do you make certain moves right from day one so you can actually stay ahead and emerge successful? So what we're going to talk about is really these three simple ideas, these three simple moves, simple but powerful. The idea of establishing clarity, gaining leverage, and executing with purpose. And the idea is, if you did that from day one, you can actually, be on your front foot and achieve success. So, what's a product talk without a roadmap? So here's the roadmap for today. Those three moves, we're going to walk through sort of discrete steps on how do you achieve each of them, and you can do it repeatably at your company. The first is establish clarity. So this whole idea of a product vision. So what is a product vision? A product vision is something that your team and your company and yourself, you're running at. It's that thing that forces you to wake up every day and run towards. And in some ways, it's sort of a reimagined world that's better as a result of all your efforts, right? So there's a lot of consensus that it's important to do a product vision. However, there's very little guidance on how to actually do it. And so the first step in sort of setting that vision is really what I call creating the minimum viable vision. So, to create the minimum viable vision, you don't need any superpowers. You don't need any crystal balls. All you need is a simple, repeatable process that we'll go through. There are three key components to a product vision document. The first is product strategies. These are the most abstract and by design. And they sort of reference how your company is going to create unique value. The second is product phases, which are more inspiring. And the third component are key principles, which are the most operational. Start with the product strategies. It's usually the easiest place to start. So product strategies are how your company creates unique value for your users, your customers. Set up in-depth interviews with your founders, with your management team, with customer service people, with your product managers, designers, read reviews, and really start understanding sort of the list of the patterns that you see, the recurring themes that you see. And you can start generating a list of strategies. You don't have to worry about, is it right or is it wrong? Just generate a list of strategies. Once you do that, start prioritizing them in terms of, hey, what could be the most important? And limit it to about 3 to 5 key priorities of strategies. And you have to inspect them for what I call sort of the 5 key criteria. So one, they have to be user-centric. Are they sort of talking about a user-centric need? 2, they have to be simple. It shouldn't be overly complicated. 3 is they have to be constant over time. So it can't be true today but false tomorrow. It has to be true today, true in a decade. And so that's the sort of the third criteria. It has to be easy to agree. So if you pull somebody at your company and say, hey, this is a product strategy, what do you think? They shouldn't go like, I'm not sure. They should be like, yes, that's obvious, that's right. And finally, it should have a ton of innovation capacity. What I mean by that is it shouldn't be something that you can solve just in a quarter or 2. It should be something you should be able to innovate against for like a decade. And it should still have, the headroom to innovate against. So let's take some examples. So some of the product strategies that you might be familiar with, you take Amazon, for example. Some of their key strategies are pricing, selection, convenience. And obviously, convenience is a big part of the Prime program, and they continue to build it out. Same-day shipping, same afternoon shipping, drones, and it keeps going. But you think about it, right? It has that, it's constant over time, ton of innovation capacity. Netflix, very personalized, very easy to use, and massive selection. So let's do a simple exercise. Let's, if you can volunteer, raise your hand, and say, your name and maybe what product you work on, and maybe just guess what might be a good strategy for your company or startup. And don't worry, it doesn't have to be right. It's just, just a way to get the mind flowing.
I'll do it. My name is Karen. I'm a UX teacher at Ironhack, and I don't have like one word to describe it, but my goal, and I think the company's goal, is to help people get jobs, designer or developer, is to get jobs.
Yeah. So that is basically, what is needed to help people get jobs from a product standpoint?
I think an understanding of the craft, whether you're a designer or developer, but also an understanding of what the market wants. So maybe there's like the ideal way of teaching UX or development, but also what does the market want? They want to when designers interview for a job, someone wants a website, whatever that means. They want an app, make it look pretty. Whether that's actually design, we have to understand that's what the market needs and how designers can sell themselves and use that.
Yeah.
So it's both knowledge as well as knowledge of what the market wants.
Great. So something there could be like relevant selection of courses, or something like that could be relevance, could be like a strategy for your business potentially, because that's what you're trying to match demand to what you're offering. So if it isn't relevant, nobody is going to sort of select it. So relevance could be like a strategy. Any other examples?
Hello, does this work? Yeah. I also work at a coding bootcamp, coincidentally. So I would say simplicity might be one of the things. We take complex knowledge and we break it down so that normal people can start to understand these complex things.
Great. That's a great one.
No coding?
No. Hi, I'm Sarah. I work for Envision, and I think that if we were to do one, it would be low barrier to entry. Low barrier to entry.
Got it. So like easy onboarding or something like that? Great. Cool.
Hi, my name is Michelle. I work for an organization called Crisis Text Line, and I would say that ours would be quality. So it's exactly what it sounds like. It's a 24/7 nationwide crisis counseling service via text message, so providing quality to the texter.
Got it.
Yeah.
What about like time to respond?
Yeah, that's a big one as well.
Great.
Hi, my name is Marcos. I'm a student here in Ironhack, and right now I'm working on my final project. And I'm trying to help people to know when they're outside their cities, when they're in vacation or something like that. And I'm trying to help people to find like live where to go outside, like partying during the night. And the strategy that I want to, or the pain point that I'm trying to attack is that anxiety that you get when you go to a place and you don't know if it's going to be the kind of place that you like. So that's basically what I'm doing now.
Got it. So you could have something like timely as like a product strategy, which is you want to connect people to, some.
With people mostly.
Yeah.
What I'm trying to have is a reliable source, and we already know with social media like Facebook or Twitter or there's nothing as powerful as the power of people as a whole, as a community. So
Got it.
when you see patterns, you know that chances are that what you see is true. So you know that if you see something that you like, chances are that it is true what you're seeing. So you would go there and you will get what you want.
Yeah, so maybe quality of community or something like that. Yeah, great. So, but you get the idea, right? Like even with a little bit of thought, you're able to articulate what matters for the experience that you're building for your users. Now, once you write those down, things get more interesting. The second part is the product phases, and this is where you can be more creative and you can bring it to life. So I'm going to show you with like a simple, somewhat even silly example how to do that. So imagine you're writing the product vision doc for the transportation industry. Imagine this is like 200 years ago, right? And you just had horse-drawn carts. So it's probably virtually impossible for you to predict all the key shifts in technology and the timing of it, right? It's impossible. But what you can do is think about the product strategies for the transportation industry. It's super simple, right? It's easy, fast, safe. It's always been the case. How do you get things to be easier, faster, safer? And so with those three as your product strategies, you can predict at least sort of 3 major shifts that could happen in the transportation industry. You could say, hey, I think I could probably bet that we're going to move off of horses and into some kind of, different kind of energy source to drive transportation. You might not know exactly when, you might not know what it is, but you might say like, look, the power source is going to change, right? That's one. You could probably also say that the cabins are going to become really comfortable and safe, the cabins that transport people. You could also say that at some point, we're going to be able to fly. And because flying devices have been in the sort of the human psyche and imagination since Da Vinci's time. People always wanted to do it, right? It just took a really long time to actually accomplish it. So you can see, even without too much sort of research, with simple sort of 3 strategies, easier, faster, safer, you were able to sort of predict the future of the transportation industry. And then what you can do is once you have that kind of prediction, you can bring it to life. You can do narratives. So narratives could be like a storyline of how does the world look like once that happens. You could do visuals. You could create posters, or you could even you could do videos to bring it to life. Just so it starts feeling like, oh, this is the world once you start moving in this direction. So this is a key part. It's a very creative process that hopefully should be fun. Once you do that, you go to principles, and the principles are the most tactical. So this is how your team actually makes decision on a day-to-day basis. It's for example, I'll give you some examples. Do you prioritize moving fast with incomplete data versus trying to figure out the right answer before you move, right? So bias for action. So do you prioritize speed over quality? Do you prioritize users over business? So these are principles, and these are very unique to your specific business, and you can write them down so your teams know how to make decisions when they are thinking about sort of minute feature launches, when they're thinking about what to do next, and they are very helpful on a tactical level. So look, at this point, you've sort of hit those 3 key components of a product vision doc. You might feel like you want to, you might want to jump with joy at this point, because you have the minimum viable vision now. However, remember that this is just the starting point. There's a ton of work. This is just the beginning of how you get to work in developing the product vision. What you do after you get the minimum viable vision is you iterate it, several times, sometimes, 50 times or over, and really this is a key part of the process. The way you iterate is you start with the most trusted group. The most trusted group that you believe should shape the product vision doc. So this could be like the founder, your head of engineering, mentors, board members, trusted leads, etc. Once you do that, once you get all their input, you broaden it to leaders that eventually are going to be impacted by the product vision doc. You want their buy-in. So you need to get their inputs, whether this is the head of design, the head of research, the head of customer service, etc. And the key thing here is you have to approach it with very low ego, because you might have to completely rip apart and rewrite it so many times during this process, and that's okay. It's a good thing. Because what you're doing is, in this process, you're gaining sort of the buy-in that ultimately gets you to roll it out successfully. And how do you know you're getting there? The volume of feedback starts going down, and the excitement level starts going up when you start showing the document. That's how you know you're getting to like, oh, this is something. And then, once you have it in a reasonably good state, you roll it out through what I call is a roadshow format. So roadshow is basically, is, in my view, one of the best vehicles for the sort of the shared buy-in and excitement at the company. So roadshow is basically 8 people per session, no more. Because if you have more than that, people become shy. They don't speak up. So you want that intimate setting so people actually like ask you questions and you get the clarity going. You want it to be cross-functional, so not just either engineering or product or design. You want it to be cross-functional. And make sure to email it to those that cannot make the roadshow, so you have full coverage across the company. So at this point, remember, this is not iteration. You have to answer questions with confidence. You're not trying to iterate here. You're rolling it out. So you have to be much, this is where you have to come across as like the person who really believes in the vision. But do note if there are any remaining issues, just note them down casually, but don't bend too much. So great. So now you have the vision. You've sort of like laid out like what you're running at. Before you can execute, you actually need leverage. You're just a single person, right? So you need leverage. You need a broader sort of setup to be successful. The first part of that is to start with the right talent. So the core idea with talent is you have to think of it as a professional sports team. Very, very high quality, very distinctive. Everybody brings something different to the table, and you're assembling this amazing team. So there's a few sort of sub-ideas here. One is every position matters. Don't settle. So typically what I've found is if you can get more senior, fewer people, you can get a ton of leverage. However, that does not mean you don't hire junior people. You can, but if you hire junior people, make sure they have a ton of potential. They have a ton of headroom to grow, and they have incredible hunger to drive, value for the company. The second is every one of us has weaknesses. And as a leader, it's very important to be self-aware of what your weaknesses are. The reason is you can staff for your weaknesses. So if you have a weakness in area A, you need to make sure that your team is actually strong in that area. So staff for your weaknesses, both functionally as well as skill-wise. So if you are weak on design, make sure you get a really strong design leader who you can lean on and trust and make them a partner in the process. Minimize the number of layers and the number of directs. Because this is basically, as the company grows, communication and alignment become extremely challenging. So the more layers you have and the more directs you have, it becomes exponentially harder, not just linearly harder, exponentially harder in driving alignment. And all of a sudden you realize you're saying something and the person who is 2 levels, reporting into you is understanding something completely different because of, the communication translation layer to layer. So keep it small, keep it tight to the extent that it's possible. Think about, do you need other functions to be successful? Does the product need content? Does it need design? Make sure you have all the ingredients that the product needs to be successful. So here's a bit of, a set of flavors for how you find typically product managers. So product managers, you need to have a minimum bar on production, which is how do you actually execute? How do you launch features? Analysis, which is once you launch features, how do you actually analyze what worked, what didn't work, and how do you go after what's successful? And design, which is creativity, how do you come up with ideas, how do you flesh things out, how do you design them? And you want a minimum bar in all 3. However, usually every PM has a superpower. They have a superpower that's one of these 3. It's not all 3. It seldom is all 3. It's always just one. So make sure that all your PMs don't have the same superpower, whether it's like production or design. Then you just have a team that's very skewed and you don't have the balance. So make sure you mix the superpowers on your team. Once you have the right talent, you've got to sort of cluster them correctly and set them up for success. So as a product leader, one of the big challenges that a product leader faces is you have this massive problem set. How do you cut it up, right? How do you cut it up into bits that the team can run after? So there's no, I've tried a lot of different sort of configurations. What I can tell you is there is no right or wrong answer. There are just different ways to do it. And here are some possible ways to cut your team into different sort of sub-teams. So you could cut your product team along the lines of core product versus growth, and we'll talk about what that means. You could cut it by platform. So let's say your product exists on iOS, Android, and there's a website. You could cut it by platform. You could cut it by product. So you might have a B2C product. You might have a B2B product. You could cut it along those lines. You could cut it along services. So let's say you're like Amazon. There's like a recommendation service. There's a purchase service. And you could cut it along the lines of services and set up teams along those lines. Or you could cut it along the funnel. So user acquisition, activation, engagement, retention, conversion. So those are all possibilities. The key thing to solve for is make sure those teams can operate independently of each other. And they don't step on each other's toes. And they have the autonomy and the clarity of what they own and what they're running at. Then there's this idea called minimum viable teams. So minimum viable teams are teams that have the minimum number of people to succeed. So incomplete teams are sometimes as bad as no teams. So oftentimes you have to be really careful about how you set up teams, and you have to look at, do you have all the ingredients for the team to be successful? Sometimes it's missing maybe a data scientist, it's missing a back-end engineer, or it's missing a product designer. But you have to, as a product leader, you have to absolutely make sure that a team has reached MVP. If not, they can't succeed, and it's on you. It's on you as a product leader that they have failed, because you haven't given them all the ingredients to be successful. Once you do that, you can start inspecting for different sort of symptoms and problems. So if these teams are complaining about lack of clarity, lack of direction, it probably means you have to check on the PM and see if they are doing a good job of directing the team. If there's poor user experience, it's not enough innovation, it's maybe not enough design, maybe not enough creative, not enough content. If the throughput is slow, you're not seeing output from the team as fast as you'd like, maybe it's not the right mix of engineers. So maybe the seniority is off, maybe the mix of engineering is off. But those are things to inspect. The most important thing you have to establish upfront with the team is you have to tell them, please don't get married to the name of your team, to the metrics and the mission, because it's going to change. And in a growth stage company, the most important thing is flexibility. So, and people get comfortable with the teams that they become a part of. So you have to level set and say, look, this is all going to change. This is just the initial staffing model, and we're going to revisit it as the needs evolve. So that's really important. So this is missing some visuals, but core product versus growth. So this is a classic question. How do you think about core product versus growth? So core product is typically organized as multiple squads. So squads are cross-functional team. You have product manager, you have designer, you have few engineers, front end, back end. You have data quality, and you can have multiple squads, each focused on a different thing. Growth has sort of 3 sub-functions. There's growth squads, which are similar, which look kind of similar to product squads. Then you have frontline teams, which are more performance marketing, CRM. And then you have sort of growth tech, which is tools and capabilities that help the overall growth team function better. What I would recommend if you're just a new company is you start small. Have maybe 1 or 2 squads on core product, maybe just 1 squad on growth, and a small frontline marketing team. And you might wonder, hey, there's a squad on core product, there's a squad on growth. How are they different? So even though they sort of look similar, the approaches are actually very different. So on growth, the goal is capture the most value from the product that you already have. Whereas on product, you're continuously building product to create more value for users. So the typical mindset on growth is what I call the hunter mindset, which is you're just going in to deliver results. Whereas on product, it's the farmer mindset, which is you're more process driven. You're trying to orient towards the long term. You're trying to create value. And primary obsession on growth is metrics. So you're just hey, how do I improve this metric? And on product, it's more about user needs. How do I satisfy people's needs? How do I make this a better experience? You focus on flows, pricing, messaging, on growth. You improve the experience and functionality on product. And shorter cycles on growth, longer cycles, and you move metrics. Ultimately, that's how you measure success. You move metrics. Or on product, it depends. It could be satisfaction, it could be NPS, it could be a whole range of things. But what's confusing about this is sometimes you have to approach product with a growth approach. So think about a product like a social network, right? The core value of a social network actually increases as more people use it. So the core value is actually tied to growth. So in scenarios where you have a product where growth actually improves its value, you can approach core product through a growth lens. And on the other side, conversely, sometimes you might have to approach growth through a product lens. You might say, hey, I want to obsess over this metric, but over a point of time, you might fully optimize it and you won't go anywhere. You might start hitting a wall. So you go to a product approach, you say, hey, what are the real user needs and how do I take it to the next level? So the key takeaway is don't get religiously attached to any of these. You have to, as a product leader, think about, these are tools in your toolkit. So think about opportunistically which one makes sense for which sort of scenario and apply them. So you have the talent, you've clustered them. Now you have to arm them with capabilities so they can actually go and deliver for you. So the three sort of capabilities that are table stakes in my view are, number one is event tracking and self-serve. So event tracking is really tracking sort of user activity in whatever experience that you've launched. And it tells you what's working and what's not. It's critical to optimization and analysis. Self-serve is your product people have to be able to access the data by themselves without having to rely on other bottlenecks or analysts. So however you do it, whatever infrastructure you create, just allow people to access data by themselves. The second is what I call the experimenters. So experimenters are what allow you to run A/B tests at scale. So these are, you should be able to target different platforms, different user segments, and different territories. So you might want to test something maybe in Canada, and you should be able to do that. And you should be able to learn something from a local launch and then roll it out worldwide. The third is messaging. It's table stakes. You've got to be able to message to your users both inside the product as well as through channels, whether it's email or push notes. So prioritize getting these capabilities for your team before you run hard, because these are going to be needed no matter what you're going to do. Great. So you've established clarity, you've gained the leverage. Now you have to execute with purpose. So it's very tempting because you now have this product vision doc that you've created. It's very tempting to start with this shiny doc and say look, let's do that. Let's do what we need to do to deliver on the product vision. More often than not, what's true is you probably have a live product. You have a product that people are using. There's a ton of feedback you're getting from people. There's a ton of problems with it, and there's a ton of data from it. So what I would recommend is you start there. You start with the product that's probably live, and you understand what are the most important and pressing problems. So one sort of key guidance, while you do that is what I call stay above the line. So, and this is something that most leaders trip over. They go to their team and say, hey, do this for me. And they prescribe a solution. And the team is demotivated as a result of it. So what I recommend is, as a leader, you have to stay above the line. State the problem, and let the team figure out the solution. State the question, let the team figure out the answer. State the what, let the team figure out the how. It's very important for team morale. It's really important for the best results. And if you find yourself sort of going below the line, catch yourself before you do it and pull yourself back up. So list and prioritize problems. And these could be user problems, they could be metric problems, they could be tech problems. So activation, churn, these are just examples, right? I've just made a list of some examples. a user says, I didn't know what to do after I used the product, I didn't find any relevant content, and maybe engagement is a problem, maybe there's technical issues with the product, just make a list. And then select the top few problems to go deeper. Understand why, go really deep. And at this point, I'd recommend, if your team can afford it, if your headcount can afford it, to engage a design researcher. Design researchers are really, really, key to unlocking the deep insights of why people are doing certain things with your product. And they can uncover, like, if activation is an issue, why is it an issue? Once you have a good idea of the problem set, your team can actually brainstorm and backlog solutions. And these are, a great starting point for road mapping. This is a great starting point for what you can build as a team. So, it's what often happens is when you have a live product, it's very comforting to stay in this world. Oh, there's a ton of user feedback. Users are very unhappy with this flow, and you're just constantly solving problems. But remember, there is a reason you wrote your product vision doc, right? There is a bigger mission for your company. And so in parallel, start funding a very small effort on working against the vision. And what I recommend here is to prototype, to build prototypes against your vision, which is basically product phases, product strategies, and key principles. And I like this metaphor of the concept car. So, concept cars are interesting, right? Like, they're amazing, these amazing cars that get built by these car companies, but most of them never see the light of day. They are primarily built to inspire both externally and internally the capabilities of the company. And oftentimes, what happens is some of the technologies in the concept car get pulled into the roadmap, right? But the concept car never really gets built. And so, think about these prototypes as this concept car. So how do you build these prototypes against your product vision? And how do you get the team thinking about big step changes in the experience and not get buried in all the problems that they're seeing from users, from the data? And so this is really important to balance your innovation portfolio. And then you roadmap with a mix of both. So from the bottom, you have solutions from problems. From the top, you have prototypes against vision. And together, it creates your roadmap. And the best part about this is every entry in the roadmap can be traced back to a clear purpose. You either know you're doing it to solve a problem, or you're doing it to move your company closer to the vision. And that's really important for the team. The why behind what you're doing is really important for the team. Once you have the roadmap, you execute and learn. You have all the sort of the things needed to execute and learn. So I'm going to show you some sanitized data from some of the experimental work we did at Headspace. And so we've been testing different core actions in the product. And so we launched, and one of the things we learned when we launched is this metric of what percentage of users use that core action multiple times in a week. So this is use it once, use it 2 times, 3 times, 4 times. And we found that when this usage is high, it usually means that there is heat, and there is going to be a successful sort of feature. And what's interesting is we've launched a number of experiments, and we've had a range of outcomes, right? We've had like one home run, which is right at the top. It's incredible heat for that particular feature. We've had several sort of middle of the road results, which is sort of what I call a double. We've had several swings and misses, and that's okay. This is a normal distribution of outcomes. What's cool is we've learned, okay, here's what matters to our product. Repeat usage within a week matters, and it's an early indicator of success. We've also learned that there is something that works much better for our users and something that doesn't. And so the contrast and the comparison helps us understand learnings, and I'll show you what they are. But these benchmarks are different for different products. For your product, once you start executing, you might learn that there's a different metric that actually indicates success.
So can you explain what the lines mean? Like, why aren't they crossing? Like, why? So run is always a home run, how come it didn't change from week to week?
Yeah. So I don't know if all of you heard. The question was, Praveen was curious why the lines all stay separated and don't cross each other. And in this case, they don't cross because that's just the data. But sometimes they might. What it usually tells me is, look, if the data were that this was higher and then crossed over, it would mean that this has good early engagement, but it doesn't have long-term engagement, right? And what I can see here is that early engagement is a good predictor of long-term engagement, and a successful feature remains a successful feature over multiple usage, which is a good thing, which means that the sort of the predictability of a product manager of whether something's going to be successful is going to be high. They can look at the first time usage, the second time usage, and start saying, okay, this is probably going to last. It's not going to turn. So what we've done is we've looked at this home run, and we've looked at things that didn't work, and we've said, like, hey, what's the difference? Like, why is it that this thing worked and this thing didn't work? And what we've learned is three things. We've learned that, look, when you want something to work, it needs to have a quick aha moment. So you need to get into the value that feature delivers quickly, and then provide positive reinforcement to the user. You need to set the feature up for reusability. So what I mean by that is help the user understand how and why to come back and reuse that feature. And so you're setting up the feature for success. And the third is how you link to the feature, both in-app and through channels. Like, how do you bring people back into experiencing that particular feature? So once we've sort of codified these learnings, we've said, oh, this is what drives success. We've applied it more consistently across multiple things in the experience, and we've improved the performance of the overall app experience. So I want to show you how you would apply these kinds of learnings. And for the benefit of all of you, I picked a feature from Spotify, because I thought that more people might have used this feature. So how many of you have used the Discover Weekly feature? Awesome. That's what I predicted. So it was about 80%. So if there's any Spotify product people either in the audience or who are going to watch the recording, pardon me for using a Spotify example. But I think it's purely for illustration and education purposes that we can talk about this. So it looks like most people have used it. So the Discover Weekly feature is a weekly playlist. It's generated algorithmically based on your past usage data. There's probably some kind of a propensity model under the hood that predicts, like, hey, this is what I expect you to like, and it queues it up. And every Monday it refreshes, and you can go in and listen to these new songs that you wouldn't have otherwise discovered. And you're like, wow, that's really good. Like, I like those songs, but I've never heard of them. So it's a great discovery, and it delivers on the promise of music. And so think about this feature. So, and these are obviously learnings that we've had. But if we were to apply this, so think about when you get the aha with Discover Weekly. It's probably like maybe after 1, 2, or 3 songs, you understand, this is kind of cool. This is it has predicted my taste pretty well. So I think what Spotify can do to improve this is, after maybe a few songs, is to reinforce the value prop. The first time you use it, like maybe after 3 times, it can reinforce it and say, look, this is a highly personalized playlist with songs that you're going to love, made every week fresh for you, right? And communicate that to the user either in-app or through channels. And that just lands the aha much clearer than it does today. The second is the reusability. This feature is literally designed for reusability because every week it changes. It's a new list. But nowhere does it say, hey, your next list is going to appear on X date. And it doesn't have a toggle to turn on a push notification, right? So that would be it would be a logical addition. Imagine it said, like, hey, your next list is going to appear on the next Monday. It tells you a date. You have a toggle for turning on push notification. You turn it on, and you actually get a contextual push note on the next Monday. And it deep links into shuffle play. So all you do is you swipe in, and boom, you're into the experience, and it starts playing your Discover Weekly for the next week, right? I can confidently say that with those kinds of improvements, this feature will actually see a massive lift to engagement. And much more, it's an incredibly successful feature for the company. But I think just to illustrate how you can use learnings on even like a fairly well-established feature to improve its performance, right? And that's how you create value across the company. You learn, and then you apply it across the company. So that's it, establish clarity, gain leverage, execute with purpose. Look, I mean, there's a ton more. There's a ton more to product leadership than what I've spoken about here. There's obviously a lot more, but this, is sort of the hand-selected 3 things you can do to, from your first day, set yourself up for success. And it's meant to be that guidance during the early part of a product leadership role. And hopefully it makes, your life more fun and more easy, and you can keep your superhero capes for a long period of time.
Hey, my name is Charles. I'm with Right at Home. We're a services industry, so not really a technology play, but definitely understood and got a lot of value of what you're saying. One question I have is, how do you keep people from targeting on vision and not on metrics? So for example, a lot of times you see like that great home run slide that you had, and all of a sudden some people are like, okay, well now we really just need to target people to show up 4 times in a week, and then our product is a winner. And we used to do that in a technology play I had where it was setting appointments, and so people were just like doing what they could to get people in an appointment, but it wasn't really playing out to the vision and goal of the company.
Yeah, I think this is why I think it's the product leader's role is really important, because there's a lot of nuance to judging the metrics, to auditing sort of the roadmap to make sure it's balanced across metrics and vision. And I think staying connected to the user. Ultimately, as a product leader, one of the things that I make it a point to do is sit with our customer service teams and basically, listen into calls and read sort of user reviews. So you keep in touch with like the real sort of emotion and the sentiment of the user, where you can catch these kinds of things, whether things are moving in the right direction. But from a sort of a process standpoint, it's largely about, making sure your roadmap is balanced. You have both the sort of the metric-oriented, features. You also have features, the concept car, against your vision, and your feedback is from the users on like, are you going in the right direction?
I would love it if you could share maybe an experience at Headspace where one of those 3 things helped you through a major challenge for either you or your team.
All of it. All of it.
One story.
So look, I think, this is the reason I made this presentation and this story is so a lot of people would not make the mistakes that I've made. And I think, for example, I set up the product vision at Headspace 1 year into my role. It was way too late. I wish somebody had taught me like, hey, do this on day 1. And so what happened is, as a result, people were, they were excited by the near-term roadmap, but they were clueless. Like, hey, what are we doing like 1 year down the road? What are we doing? What is the larger sort of product vision? And so I had to figure out, 1 year in, how to do this. And so that was one. I would say the leverage bit, I think, when you're trying to grow a company, you can be attracted to hire people quickly. So sometimes you make hiring mistakes, and it comes back to bite you, like really quickly. And so being patient, even though it's painful, there's a lot of work to be done. And really sort of making sure you have the right leveling and the right skill when you hire is key, which we spoke about in like how you build your team. And the other bit is, if you have a great team but you don't have the tools, they get frustrated because they can't launch experiments, they can't understand what's going on. So if you don't prioritize capabilities, your team gets frustrated and trips over. So all these are sort of my mistakes presented to you as, sort of do's and don'ts. But I think the key is how do you sort of quickly learn and turn it into an advantage and sort of a codified learning that you then sort of share with the team so they all like are on the same boat.
Thank you. First of all, I'm a huge fan of Headspace. That's why I'm here. So thank you for being here.
Thank you.
I have a two-part question. I hope that's okay.
Of course.
As a startup founder, how do I know when's the right time to hire a product person? And the second part will be, what do you look for in a product manager?
Yeah. Yeah, I think you probably are going to need, there's no formula for it, but I would say you're probably going to need a product person when you become maybe, about 10 to 15 people. And you can start with a product manager. You don't need a product leader. And then when you get to maybe about 30 to 40 people, you probably need a product leader as a company. And then when you get to 100 people, you need like a fairly seasoned product leader. And then 500 companies like, it's just like, because product leaders are not the same. They're, each person has some kind of a sweet spot in terms of the scale and the size of business. But those would be rough rules of thumb that I would use for product people. I think the second question is what to look for. Yes. Yeah. So I think, the three things, we spoke about it in the flavors of product managers: production, design, and analysis. So the way I assess for those is typically through a case-based sort of interview style, which is, hey, let's say somebody comes to interview at Headspace, first they should have used the experience and they should have used the app. If not, it's a big red flag. And if they have used it, if they're a good product person, they probably have tons of ideas of how to improve it. So, usually I ask like, hey, just be brutally honest and like walk through what you would improve and how. And the case is basically about the ideas themselves. So that helps me understand how creative they are. And then I ask them to flesh out some ideas. So that's the sort of the design side of things. And then it's about the how they would prioritize. So because you can't build everything in one shot. So how do you chunk it up? How do you break it apart? So that tells me a little bit about the execution and the production side of things. And then I have them model expected outcomes. So how do they expect that feature to perform when it goes live, which helps me understand the analysis part. So they have to build a funnel. So like, hey, if 100 people use it, 50 people are going to turn it on. Of them, 20 people are going to engage with it the second time. Of them, 5 people are going to do the final action and work through the math and that sort of thing. So together that gives me, just through one question, the full sort of assessment across those 3 skills. And usually with that, you can pick up pretty quickly if they're a good product person. Yeah, of course.
So you mentioned that basically that you had to gain leverage, right?
Yeah.
You brought these principles in. And basically what I'm wondering is, do you have specific leaders within the company that served as allies for you to gain that kind of leverage, to know that like I'm going to set the culture, I'm going to set the tiebreakers in a specific way? And the reason I ask is because I'm a founder of a 20-person startup that just recently hired a product manager, right? The first product manager.
Perfect.
And what we noticed is that some of the intuitions are not always the same, right? The founders may have had a lot of impact on what the product initially looked like. And you bring a product manager in that's trying to set a new culture. And I'm not sure if your experience overlaps with that, but I was wondering, basically, like, did you have any allies early on that helped you to like gain that leverage to kind of change the direction of the product?
Yeah, I think a key skill. It sounds like you're the the sort of the other partner in that collaboration, right? Like the founder and the product leader. It's a key collaboration. I think, I think the product person has to just be in listening mode. like for the first 3 months. They just have to listen nonstop and really understand the founder's vision, you know, the sort of the original principles and what the founder wants to build. And that's why if you go back to my, you know, product vision, you know, process, it starts with listening. It starts with in-depth interviews of the people already at the company, because you don't really get to change the direction without knowing what everybody wants to do. And so the product vision, even though the product leader writes it, they actually like are just an instrument to collect all the sort of the instincts of the company and make it coherent. So if your product manager is doing that, then it's great. If not, you should coach him to, you know, just go on a bit of a listening tour at the company and ask you, like, what do you want to build? And then, you know, start crafting that narrative. And ultimately, that's the starting point. And then within that framework, that person has they get the license to innovate, right? Because the broader alignment on the vision pre-exists.
If you had to choose one key lever that has taken Headspace to this level of success, what do you think that was?
Yeah, I think a lot of the success of Headspace is, you know, not because of me. You know, a lot of the success of Headspace were seeds planted way before I started at the company in 2010. You know, this was when our co-founders Andy Pudicombe and Richard Pearson met in Yosh Sushi in London, and you know, basically at the time Andy had a clinic where he would help people, you know, learn meditation, and London is a little bit like, you know, New York, a lot of, you know, stressed out bankers, and you know, they would go to get us help, and he would transform their lives. And so what they were trying to figure out is how do you take this and reach more people, and how do you scale, you know, and help more people. And they started off with events, and then eventually it became, you know, the first website, the first app, second app, and now what you see is the third generation of Headspace, which you know, was launched last year. You know, so I would say the reasons for its success are threefold. One is it's based, unlike a lot of, you know, other experiences, it's based on a lot of authentic expertise. So Andy actually is, you know, an ordained Buddhist monk, and he's carrying on his shoulders like this, you know, 2,600-year-old lineage of, you know, the teachings of meditation that have been handed from teacher to student, and oftentimes haven't even been written down, right? It's very like personal, and it's very intimate. So this that expertise shows in the product, and that's why people love it and people relate to it. So I think that's one. I would say the second is, you know, we call it sort of creative excellence, but it's the playful approach to it. Because meditation can be a heavy subject, but Headspace, we take a more light, playful approach to it, whether it's the animations, the characters, the color tones. So it feels inviting for people to, you know, take it on as an experience. And the third is the simplicity. You know, it can be complicated, right? And some of the concepts are very nuanced. It's hard for even, you know, Andy has spent like 10 years in monasteries just trying to understand all the stuff. So it's very complicated. So the simplicity is the third bit, which makes it successful, I think.
So you mentioned that there should be, if you can afford it, a user design researcher. Is that what you said?
Yeah, design researcher.
Design researcher. So how can a low budget team actually sort of attack that area / research?
Yeah, I think anybody can do research if you know, if you you know, figure out a few basic ways to do it, which are, it could be like, you know, maybe focus groups, or you give people some prototypes, you observe them, or you give them something to click on and you find out like how they're interacting with it. Design researchers do it really well. So if you can afford it, then you get like really good insights. But if not, it's possible to, you know, I think one book I would recommend is, it's called The Sprint. Sprint is it speaks about the Google Ventures design sprint process, and it talks about how do you get some user validation very quickly in 5 days, and and I think anybody can do it. It's just how well you can do it.
Thank you. I want to ask a specific question about analytics framework, and not speaking from technical perspective, but philosophical perspective. As a company grows, company usually grow like in specific patterns, and they need answers to specific questions at a specific time, and then they figure out, oh, we forgot to include this, let's throw it in there. How can a company kind of like look at a framework that's existing and just include everything at one go early, so when they need that data, they've already started collecting and ready to go?
So if I understand your question, you're wondering, hey, if a company starts with perfect information, you can make the best decisions.
Yeah,
but usually it takes time.
When you ask the question, you won't have any answers at that moment.
Yeah, I think it's really hard, because especially if you're sort of pre-market, product market fit, and you're really small in terms of user base, all you have to rely on is more sort of qual feedback, and that's the best information. I think round about the point you get to about 10,000 users, 5,000 to 10,000 users, is when you get like pretty good data, and you can start measuring things. And if you are instrumented for collecting those sort of user events, you can start making good decisions. The more challenging, so I would say it's just different types of information at different stages. So very early on, it's all qual, and then sort of in the mid stages, like 5,000, 10,000, it's you can get more engagement data. You still can't get conversion data. Conversion data is really hard because only a small percentage of your users convert. So to get to conversion data, you need 100,000 users, and then to get long-term retention, you need maybe like 1 million users, right? So there's different sets of information. So you have to blend what you have with your instinct, and just make those decisions until and validate if those are working with the limited information you have.
So basically, as you go along, you'll just start putting stuff in.
Exactly.